नमस्ते, स्वागत है आपका इंडिया दिस वीक के नए एपिसोड में और मैं हूं आपकी होस्ट आमना अंसारी खालिद बेग के साथ।
Hi, this is Khalid Beg, and welcome to yet another episode of India This Week. We have Wasiq again joining us from London, and we have Omer joining us from Delhi. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us again.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me.
Right, so like you can see the name of the topic, we're talking about the Qatar World Cup, the Football World Cup, but the politics also around it, and Wasiq's team doing pretty well in the Cup. Wasiq, happy with their performance till now?
Yeah, let's not speak about that right now.
Okay. So, Wasiq, I mean, the political controversies surrounding the Qatar FIFA World Cup 2022. We start off with the most famous one, which started on the opening ceremony itself. Controversial religious preacher Dr. Zakir Naik was invited to the opening ceremony of the FIFA Football World Cup Qatar 2022. He's a fugitive and most wanted in India. India raised as spokesperson Mr. Anand Bakshi. Post which Qatar claimed that there was no official invitation extended to Zakir Naik. But Faisal Al-Harji, the president of the Qatari state-owned sports channel Al-Qas, made a Twitter announcement before that welcoming him, and where he did that small gig of converting some people towards the faith. How do you look at these developments?
Well, I think this is quite important for your viewership to understand. Now, look, Zakir Naik is a controversial speaker. He's wanted in India for hate speech, money laundering, and terrorist activities. And if we think about it in terms of a historical perspective, we need to look at where is Zakir Naik currently residing in terms of his permanent status as a resident, and that's Malaysia. Now, the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mahathir Mohamad, actually rejected Naik's deportation back to Bharat. And the reason why he cites that is that as long as he is not creating any problem, we will not deport him because he has been given permanent residency status. He's also said that for the time being, Dr. Zakir Naik can stay here, but we would like to send him to some other countries where he would be safe. But there's some things that we need to think about here. The fact that the former Prime Minister of Malaysia doesn't think that Zakir Naik is a problem for Malaysia just goes to show that that's a problem in and of itself, because this guy has been accused of being a terror apologist, justifying suicide bombings, and then a manner of all other things, particularly in regards to how women are treated within Islam. So when the Malaysian government are able to send Zakir Naik to Qatar, or allow him to travel freely to Qatar and to Bharat, the way he actually comes from, this is, in my view, a smack in the face for the people of Bharat, because it shows that there is a bigotry towards Bharat that Qatar doesn't receive. Now, when we think about this and we put this into context, in terms of Bharat, Bharat is a Hindu nation, but with a secular state. So it has secular. Recently, earlier this year, Nupur Sharma, a BJP spokesman, had made disparaging remarks against the Prophet Muhammad, and as a result, she had to go into hiding. The reason why she had to go into hiding is because violent Islamists and violent fundamentalists wanted to get her. They wanted to kill her. Nupur Sharma was and is protected by the state despite her saying these things, and she's being protected against these Islamists. Who's going to go out and try and kill Zakir Naik? No one's going to go out and try and kill Zakir Naik. The state will still protect him, even if they were going to do it. The reason why he's not going back to Bharat is because it's very likely that the charges that are being brought against him, he would be found guilty. But we also need to think about this in terms of geopolitics. Now, the question that you asked was in terms of Qatar. Qatar didn't officially welcome or invite Dr. Zakir Naik, but they have allowed him to stay there. Now, if Qatar really cared about Bharat, they would have sent Dr. Zakir Naik back to Malaysia, because that would have been legally sound. They couldn't send him back to Bharat because he's officially a resident of Malaysia, but they didn't. And they allowed him to stay there, and he's still there. Not only that, but they also allowed him to propose and to be able to show conversions or converted to Islam, becoming Muslims on international TV. Now, Qatar, the whole world has got their eyes on Qatar at the moment because they're hosting the World Cup. And he's getting to have a free platform to propagate Islam. And the way that he propagates Islam has been problematic, which is why these charges are being brought against him in Bharat, but they're not, because the Qatari government don't see that he's a problem, and that's a problem in and of itself. So we need to think about why they're despite not officially inviting him, and I think that's the question that we need to ask, and that's what the Bharat government need to press Qatar on.
Umar, you've had a perspective from a British Muslim citizen, and I mean that to a believer who is spoken about the whole thing, how he disagrees with Zakir Naik's view. You yourself wrote a article in First Post and speaking about the whole fiasco with Zakir Naik being called to Qatar, India registering a protest. How do you, as an Indian Muslim, see this chain of events?
I mean, I agree with Wasiq, and I would say that when you look at the whole scenario, the whole development, Qatar inviting Zakir Naik or Zakir Naik going to Qatar as a dignitary is in itself not very surprising if you look at it, because Qatar's contribution to global jihadist terrorism is not news for anybody who has opened any news portal in the last few years. I mean, from in Iraq, they supported the AQI, the Al Qaeda in Iraq, which was a predecessor to ISIS. Then in Palestine and Israel conflict, they are the biggest donor of Hamas. They have links with the Al Nusra Front. I mean, you can say that if global jihadist terrorism was a classroom, then Qatar would be the class monitor, perhaps. So they have quite a very good contribution, a big contribution to the global jihadist network. Now, when it comes to Zakir Naik, so for us, Zakir Naik would be a controversial figure, but for Qatar, he would not be controversial. He would be an important figure who is contributing to the whole the narrative that they want to propagate in the whole world. So that being said, so in itself, it is not very surprising that they invited or not invited Zakir Naik. But Zakir Naik is not someone who can just walk into Qatar without the royal family knowing, number one. And number two, many royal family officials, they confirmed the news that he is there. They welcomed him. They many verified profiles on Twitter. They were excited that Zakir Naik has come to it. Now, what is important and what is interesting, the way they have backtracked on their claim that no, we did not invite him. He just came along and he is in the country, but he's not invited as a dignitary. Now, that is interesting, which means that he entered Doha with the knowledge of the officials, with the knowledge of the government. And after the backlash, after seeing that they have maybe toed out of the line, they suddenly backtracked that okay, we did not call him. He's just here. So I think that shows not only a contribution to global jihadist terrorism, but that shows cowardice also. That something is going wrong, something is wrong, and now you had to backtrack on your comments. So I think these two important developments also show that if you raise a matter in a manner it should be raised, it yields results. So I think Qatar has ended up exposing itself, nothing else.
Right. Also, our dear friend Zach Tanveer, who's based out of Saudi Arabia, shared a video in which Naik, in one of his videos, initially saying that football is haram, and then went to sort of the first inauguration of the Football World Cup. So that was also quite funny.
I would say that is the least of his hypocrisy.
Right. So, Amna, your next question.
Qataris wore Palestinian flag armbands in solidarity of Palestine, right? And however, Germany football team was asked to remove their One Love armband in support of LGBT community. They later protested by covering their mouth with their hand during the team photo. But interesting thing is there that FIFA said that it won't be allowed on Qatari soil, that they believe, because they believe homosexuality is a crime. So how do you see it, Wasiq and Umar? Don't you see this is in a context of clash of civilization or what?
Yeah, so I don't know if a clash of civilizations is the right way to. It's more of a clash of values, because when we think about sexuality, we're thinking more about values than civilizations, because you don't have a gay civilization and a heterosexual civilization. So I think that's probably the wrong way to frame this. But I think my view on this would be about consistency. Now, either you mix politics and sports together or you don't. And we're in a place where this binary choice doesn't necessarily exist. And there will be hypocrisies on all sides. It's like this: the Palestinians and their cause are entitled to be represented as the LGBTQI plus, particularly those who are in Qatar, and they should be in the two, because they suffer from their in their own battles, that want to be part of any of these battles. They're just normal people. They just want to be treated like normal people, but they're facing persecution in their own ways. And I just think it's an almighty shame that LGBTQI plus people do not get to have the representation that they deserve. But then when we're thinking about this in the context of our discussion, we're talking here about Qatar. So of course, Qatar are not going to allow anyone to show solidarity to LGBTQI plus people, because their hatred is rooted in a misreading of Islam. The fact of the matter is, if Qatar really cared about only Muslims, then why not care about LGBTQI Muslims? Because they exist just as heterosexual Muslims exist. And so the point that I think many of your viewers need to know, and sometimes they don't necessarily get to hear this, is that your sexuality doesn't negate your belief in Allah and the final prophet. Your disbelief in them does. If you don't believe in Allah and you don't believe in the prophet, then you're not Muslim. If you're an LGBTQI plus person and you recite the Shahada, according to me, you're a Muslim, because that's the only way you can enter into Islam. Nothing else can. There's no other entry route in there. Now, what we've seen over the last 2 weeks is having a go at Muslims for supporting, or not even supporting these sorts of things. And I think we need to just relax a bit and just think about what we're talking about here. We need to be empowering some of these Muslims who want to support LGBTQI plus people, whether they're Muslim or not, because they're people, and we don't make a distinction against people in terms of their sexuality, but Qatar does. And we don't want to be obviously involved in that. We don't want to get into that. So I wouldn't pit the Palestinian cause with the LGBTQI cause, or even the Iranian cause, because they're not in competition with each other. Now, look, Qatar is demonstrating how Muslims can only be persecuted for not being the right of Muslims. And so the idea that more than fallacy, there is certainly this certain type of Muslim that is a problem, and that's the violent Islamists and the fundamentalists, the ones who can't control themselves when they see someone who's LGBTQI plus, or they're probably even go mad at seeing someone who's or even hearing me saying that you can be gay and be Muslim. So these people are the problem. Qatar is obviously emboldening them, and I'll go back to my initial point. It's about consistency. Either there's no politics or there is politics. Qatar is clearly demonstrating that only the right type of politics can be mixed into the sports, and the wrong type of politics has no say in it. And in my view, that's shameful.
Omar, do you also see it the way Wasiq sees it, as a clash of values rather than a clash of civilizations?
I would say that there is not a lot of difference between these two phrases. I mean, a civilization is built on certain values, so we can call it as a clash of values, clash of civilizations. I don't see there's a lot of difference between the two terms. But what it essentially boils down to are human rights. Many people are saying that this is a difference of opinion, that Qatar believes in the Palestinian cause and Qatar does not believe in the LGBT cause. But I think this is not a matter of opinion. You cannot just say that, okay, Hitler had a different point of view. That if you have a genocidal hatred against a certain section of society, this is not a difference of opinion. So when Qatar is actually emboldening such people and it is claiming that, okay, we are supporting this Palestinian cause in the name of human rights, that is where my problem comes in. If you want to further a certain cause, you have all the right to further it, but please do not do it in the garb of furthering human rights. Because when you talk about human rights, then the LGBT people also come into that umbrella. Now, as Wasiq said, these people are not also worried about the Muslim lives. This is a big lie that many Muslim youth have in their minds in India, in all over the world, that countries like Qatar are champions of rights of Muslims and they're raising the voice of Muslims, which is completely wrong. The terror outfits that the Qatar government is sponsoring, the biggest casualty of those terror outfits are Muslims themselves. Those Muslims who have nothing to do with each other, those Muslims who just want to have a good life for themselves, they don't want to convert anybody, they don't want to carry out terror attacks, they don't want to establish a global caliphate or a Sharia all over the world. So these people are regular, happy go lucky people. They have nothing to do with each other. And because they're happy go lucky, these terror outfits, sponsored by countries like Qatar, they go out and kill them by hundreds all over the world. The biggest casualties are the Yazidis and the Kurds, or even regular Muslims in these countries like Afghanistan and everything. So we have to first understand that these countries are not your champions. These countries are not your voice. The rags like Al Jazeera, which I think is a shame in the name of journalism. So these only do apologia for these terror outfits, and these are not the voice of Muslims. And when it comes to hypocrisy like this, it only shows that they do not further the cause of human rights. They have a certain agenda, and the agenda is not Islamic. The agenda is not Islamic, the agenda is terror. And talking about FIFA, I will come to that later. FIFA and Europe, by organizing this event in a country like that, they are being party to this terror, they are being party to this injustice.
Right. Coming about human rights, Wasiq and you spoke about human rights. Wasiq and Umar, is that according to a report in the Guardian, 6,500 migrant workers have died in Qatar since Qatar won the hosting rights in 2010. Now, this is the data from 2010 to 2020. In those 6,500, we have 2,700 Indians, 1,600 Nepalis, 1,000 Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, Sri Lankans, right? Now, there are a couple of ways to look at it, right? I mean, somewhere, yes, I mean, if somebody wants to speak about it now, in a way, everyone's complicit, right? Nobody cares about that poor migrant worker who dies in the Middle East, especially in Qatar, right? Somewhere it's right as well. I mean, it is, the tournaments happened and about the non-existent labor rights there. These people's blood has gone into it and it's on their dead bodies that all that is there. So I don't want to have a holier than thou opinion on it because it's the brutal reality of the world. It happens. Isn't it more the moral responsibility of the states of these countries who should have, picked up this topic rather than now this becoming like a political football from both sides being throwing at each other, West saying, look at what you're doing, and they saying, well, you guys also are out of it. So Wasiq, first, how do you look at it?
Yeah, so I think that's a really important question. We need to, the way I look at it is in a utilitarian approach. So in essence, the assumption there is that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of a few. So when we think about this, we need to think about how these other governments who deal with Qatar, both in terms of security, in terms of economics and trade, how do they deal with it? Let's just park that for a second then, because what I want to do is just to highlight something that's happening in China. Now, the rhetoric in China today openly and consistently refers to Pakistan, its neighbor, as a good friend and supportive partner. And the China-Pakistan relationship, which was built in the aftermath of the 1962 Sino-Indian border dispute, it cemented its relationship a year later, and Pakistan ceded to China the Shashgam Valley, an area claimed by Bharat at the time. So China had long been concerned about Islamist militancy among the Uyghur community, Uyghur communities, that they're not all made up of Muslims. Actually, Some of them are not believers. So that's really important when we think about some of the persecution that's taking place. Now, China distanced itself from Pakistan during the Kargil War in '99 and during the Mumbai terrorist attacks in 2008, which we're currently, is currently the anniversary of that horrendous, attack that took place. Hundreds of people were killed as a result of that. Now, despite all of this, what is happening to the Uyghurs, who are not all Muslims, the Islam will cut off economic ties with China is laughable. In the same way, it would be laughable that any other country would cut off ties with Qatar just because a few hundred migrant workers from many different countries are being persecuted or not being treated very well, sometimes in some cases treated like animals. It's not going to happen. And the reason, and I'll go back to that original point, is that it's that utilitarian approach. However, having said that, it's not right to be too cynical about it. The fact that we're able to have trade with Qatar doesn't necessarily mean that we endorse it. It means that a door has been opened that we can then negotiate with them and to raise our concerns, because geopolitics is like that. What are we going to do? Go to war with them? Let's be realistic here. Let's be sensible. We're not going to go to war with them because they're killing or people are being treated badly, or they're indirectly supporting terror outfits. We need to work with them in a way that is acceptable to them, and we need to be raising our voices behind closed doors. Lots of countries do that, and we shouldn't be too cynical or too harsh about what we don't necessarily and what we cannot necessarily evidence. So yes, of course, the human rights in terms of the commerce, that's an issue. But we do need to believe that things are being done, and we can apply sanctions. Is it going to work yet? We know that sanctions are currently against Iran at the moment, but it's having literally no effect on. So we need to think about how we're going to do it, and it's going to be a careful balancing act, in my view.
Omer, how do you look at it as an Indian citizen? Because, I mean, it's not that the migrant case is good in India. Of course, not as horrible as in Qatar, but, I mean, let's be honest, brutally honest, it's not that we treat the migrant workers at some, very good pedestal. And unlike what, the West, where Wasiq comes and there's dignity of person. Omer, you're muted. Omer, you're muted.
I have a slightly different view. The migrant conditions in India, like you said, are not very great. We had a migrant crisis right here between the pandemic as well, and so we have a lot of things to learn. But when we go to a country like Qatar, so Qatar has legislations which are against human rights. There are no particular labor laws that ensure dignity of labor, and no trade unions are allowed in that way that they should be. So that is not a surprise that the migrant workers had to meet that fate in that country. That is horrible. And so the states the states that were sending these people to that country to work in those conditions are also slightly responsible, and they have to take the responsibility. So that's number one. Number two, when you take a country like Qatar, no, we do not have to directly go to war with them. No, we do not want to completely cut off the trade ties with them. I agree. But we do not go and organize FIFA in that country. Because when you are organizing such an important event in a country like that, then you cannot go into a gutter and complain that it's smelling bad, because the situation is horrible in that country. Tomorrow you will organize FIFA or any other tournament, Olympics into North Korea, and say that okay, our players were shot over free speech. If a country has a certain problem, you cannot legitimize the country. You cannot give credibility to that country by organizing such events there. Okay, sanctions should be there, and if there are no sanctions, at least do not give them the prestige, the credibility like they did. So my perspective is simple. I have written in that article also. I think it is the commercial interest more than the human rights. I don't think that we need to take lectures from any of these countries, because when it comes to Qatar, like I said, so they have jurisdiction and legislation in place which uh, do human rights violations. So I think the migrant deaths are extremely sad, and everybody involved has to take the responsibility. But the West has to be blamed, the European powers or whoever is responsible for organizing such an important event in that country. I think they need to be blamed also.
Right. So, next question I'm going to ask about Iran, and as I am a woman and I have a huge interest in Iran, the fiasco of Iran, because women are basically fighting against enforced hijab. So, my question is that Iran team refused to sing national anthem in solidarity with protester back home. Even their captain in press conference openly spoke against the brutalities of the regime. And one Iranian woman also wore a jersey with the name of Masha Amini. So, when we see, however, she was asked to remove that jersey. Uh, when do you see this kind of protest even by their sports persons outside of their country? So, uh, what is that which come to your mind? How do you see that courage of Iranians? Wasik, you can start, then Umar can join in.
Yeah, so thanks. I think it's a powerful symbolic gesture. It just goes back to the question that you were asking in terms of the solidarity that Qatar was showing to Palestinians. Palestinians have that right to for people to stand up for them, just as the Iranian people have the right to be able to be protested for by the Iranian football team. But the reality, and it is an unfortunate reality, is that it will have little to no impact on what's currently taking place in Iran. Let's put this into context. The protests are inspiring, of course they are, and but they're not going to last forever. The Iranian regime is aware of protest fatigue, and that will kick in because these can't do this forever. What actual wins are they getting as a result of this? We're getting a few, symbolic wins, but no real change is happening as a result of this. And that's not me saying that they shouldn't do that. They should absolutely 100% continue protesting, but they need to work out what their deliverables are. What are their key performance indicators? And they need to really, systematize themselves and work out what it is that they want to achieve and how they're going to achieve it and by when. And at the moment, it doesn't seem like that sort of leadership in terms of these protests currently exists. Now, look, everyone plays their own role in their own way against something that is obviously as egregious as the way the Iranian women, particularly the women, are being treated in Iran. Now I'll go back to something really interesting in terms of this, and to add kind of a bit of a religious, despite it being a symbolic gesture, it's still worth something. And we cannot say that it cannot be worth anything. It has to be worth something. So, even when it comes to, in Islam, when it comes to praying, we're taught that even if you move your finger, that is still good enough or accepted by God, by Allah, as a form of prayer. And so in the same way that if the Iranian football team are not singing the national anthem, again, that's good enough to at least do something, at least to get the conversation going. Now, the thing is, prior to the game, the team captain, Ali Riza Jahanbakhsh, said that he and his teammates would decide collectively whether they would take stand during the anthem in support of the anti-government protest. And they obviously did. They all were, so to speak, singing from the same hymn sheet, even though they weren't literally singing. Now, this is really important because this wasn't the first time that they did it. On November the 11th, they did it against a friendly match. And so most of the players declined to sing then. But because it was at such a important juncture of the football in Korea. And also the whole definitely needed. They needed to do that, and they needed to make sure that it was there. Now, just a reminder for your audience why it's important to do this. At least 419 protesters have been killed since September in Iran. And that includes 60 children, and more than 17,000 people have been arrested, according to a human rights activist news agency. So you can see why it's important that they do this. And we shouldn't necessarily say that it's not going to have an impact. It will have an impact. We just need to work out, or at least be accepting that it might not have the necessary impact that we're looking for, but we need more of this. And they were absolutely right to do it. And it just goes back to my thing about consistency. If they can do that, then we should be able to see people showing solidarity to LGBTQI people, as well as to the Palestinian cause, because they're all having their own battles. So either you allow them all to do it or you don't.
Omer, continuing on that same topic, for me personally, this is the most heroic protest that I have seen in a long time, or maybe I have the most heroic protest I've seen in my life till now. It's also somewhere a rebuttal to this tendency nowadays that under the garb of attacking the fundamentalists and Islamists, there is this tendency of generalizing all Muslims. And here are Muslims, ordinary Muslims, brave hearts of their national teams who are standing up to a fascist regime and, putting out everything out there. You don't know when they go back, what will be the backlash, right? This is also quite a powerful system that ultimately they too are victims of political Islam, right? How do you see it as an Indian Muslim, Umar, the way Iran is going out? It's heroic and it's tragic at the both time. Your volume.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it is extremely brave of them. Kudos to these people that are actually putting their lives on the line for the cause that they believe in. And the cause is one of women's rights, and women's rights, once again, are nothing but human rights, something that Iranian regime still has to understand. So I think it is a very heroic symbol, and it has started a very good conversation. There are a lot of people who did not even know that how bad the situation is when it comes to women's rights in Iran, and this has started a sort of awareness in India, in the East, in US, in Europe. I'm sure everybody, everywhere, people are talking about it. Mahsa Amini has become an icon, and I firmly believe and I hope that her sacrifice does not go in vain, because it is really sad that in 21st century, women are fighting for their right to just wear whatever they want in a country, um, uh, and it has its legislation. I mean, 1963, 1964, Russia was sending women to space. I mean, so this is I would once again say the difference of civilization. However, like Wasiq said, it needs to be seen whether it yields the result that we want, that we hope to see. Because I think the regime changes do not happen on its side. There is always, or most of the time, some foreign intervention that takes place. I mean, 1979. Once again, there was some foreign intervention. So I don't think it is happening right now. So there is a larger game, a geopolitical game that plays out. Like in the case of Qatar, also, I was saying that why the West is trying to whitewash the things of Qatar is it once again comes to commercial interest. Qatar has the second largest gas reserve after Russia, and they are having a bad tiff with Russia. So they're just closing up with Qatar, and Qatar has also signed a deal with China. So the Russian gas can come through China to once again Qatar and into Europe. So this whole game is much larger than we think. But at the level of values, I think this is a heroic protest. What Iranian people are doing, what Iranian women are doing, and they are keeping at it for so long. This inspires. This shows that and the point you raised about Muslims being a victim of political Islam, I think that is the group missed out by right wing from all over the world. Right? We talk about Taliban, we talk about Al Qaeda, we talk about ISIS. We forget that the biggest victims of Al Qaeda, ISIS, and Taliban are Muslims themselves. So this is a very important group, and the people who are fighting ISIS, Al Qaeda, and Taliban are also Muslims. So as a Muslim from India, I would say that we should shout, we should cheer for those Muslims who are fighting these terror outfits, and do not feel sorry for the people who are just spreading terror in the name of religion. So I think that would be my take on it. And once again, salute to those brave hearts from Iran.